Please be seated. Woe to the shepherds who destroy and scatter. Any reading that begins woe tempts me to preach hell, fire, and brimstone. Not to worry. With war and famine and cold-hearted deceit rampant in the world and in our own country, scolding and bombast are the last things we need to hear. Much has transpired since the days of Jeremiah, but history seems to repeat itself ad nauseam. Jesus, however, has a different, a more potent message that outlasts the deeds of scattering shepherds. Despite all the wrongs that surround us, we still gather to pray, to praise, to forgive and be forgiven, to hear the word and share broken bread and outpoured wine. And so nourished, we then return to the world that God has created, to continue what Jesus did and still does through us. Remember and take heart at the words in the letter to the Colossians. God has rescued us from the power of darkness and transferred us into the kingdom of his beloved Son. And again, he is the head of the body, the church. Through baptism into Christ's death, we are alive in God. We are the church, Christ's body in the world. We are his hands and his eyes and his heart. Despite all the woe in our world, there is no choice but to live. There is so much good and beauty in God's creation. To surrender, to succumb to fear and anger and hopelessness will not make us nor the world any better. It is fruitless to ask why God lets so much hurt into our lives. The answer to this why will come at the end, when time is no more. That's not a cop-out. Searching for the unanswerable distracts, distorts, even blocks the work God has given us to do justly, to love kindly, to walk humbly before our God. The Lord does not browbeat us to believe this way or behave this way or that. Rather, God invites us to share the work of salvation with Christ. Whatever you do to the least of these, you do to me. The kingdom is not some far-off place, some far-off dream or reward. The kingdom is among us now, because Christ is among us. Christ is not only enthroned in God's eternal presence, but also enthroned in those among us who struggle, who fear, who hunger for food and hope for justice. Christ is among us when we search and struggle, when we fear and hunger and work for justice. Between the world wars, in the midst of devastation and economic depression, communism and fascism were gaining control of political parties and governments. In 1923, on the weekend of October 28th through the 31st, Mussolini's black-shirted paramilitary followers marched into Rome and edged out the constitutional monarchy. In 1925, 2 years later, during the Jubilee year, the Pope, to counter this, instituted the Feast of Christ the King, to be celebrated on the last Sunday of October, the anniversary of Mussolini's coup. This feast was Pope Pius XI's way of proclaiming and asserting the role of Christ in daily life and in the life of history. The last Sunday of October was and is Reformation Sunday. In 1925, ecumenism and church unity were a yet-to-be grace of the Holy Spirit. But soon after the close of the Second Vatican Council, when the spirit of unity moved within the Christian churches, a new and unique way of unity began. Pope Paul VI moved today's feast to this last Sunday of the liturgical year, removing any semblance of national or denominational dominance. It is a fitting conclusion to the liturgical years. Since then, many Christian churches have added today's feast to their calendars, so that the words of today's collect take on a more poignant significance. Almighty and everlasting God, mercifully grant that the peoples of the earth, divided and enslaved by sin, may be freed and brought together under his most gracious rule. Despite all the conflict and pain we see around us, Christ is still at work in the world, despite the dictators and politicians. Christ is at work in us, who are Christ's body in the world, to proclaim release to the captives and recovery of sight to the blind, to let the oppressed go free, to proclaim a year of the Lord's favor. There is an unwritten story, authorship unknown, a dream, if you like, that is a metaphor for our life together. It goes like this. There is a large banquet hall with beautifully decorated, sturdy tables covered with crisp, clean linen tablecloths. The tables are set with finely made glasses and plates. The plates are filled with expertly cooked, delicious food, and glasses are brim-filled with fine wines and clear, clean water. The dinner guests are shouting at one another, and there is an undercurrent reminiscent of a dull roar. All the diners have long silver forks and knives tied to their arms. It is impossible to get the food into their mouths. Suddenly, the dream changes. The banquet hall is the same beautifully decorated room. The tables are covered with the crisp, clean linen tablecloths. The food, the wine, the clean, clear water are still there. Now, there is music and laughter and animated conversation. The guests still have the long forks and knives tied to their arms, but amid the music and conversation and laughter, the guests are feeding one another. This is Christ's kingdom. This is God's Christ among us still. This is the kingdom promised from the cross. This day you will be with me in paradise. May the kingdom be our comfort, our joy, and our work to bring Christ's life in us and in all creation to a glorious completion, all in God's good time.